Palisade Radio is brought to you by First Majestic Silver Corp., one of the world's purest and fastest growing silver mining companies.
Welcome back to another episode of Palisade Radio. This is your host, Colin Cattell. And on the line with us today is a guest you might be familiar with if you've been in the uranium business for some time, or if you participated as an investor in the last major uranium boom. His name's George Glasier, and he was previously the president and CEO of Energy Fuels from 2006 until 2010. George, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Colin.
During your time at Energy Fuels, you managed to put together a world-class management team, acquire several uranium projects, and successfully permit the Piñon Ridge uranium mill in Colorado, which was the first uranium mill to be permitted in the USA in 25 years. And we were just talking about, before we hit record on the interview, that in your first year as president of Energy Fuels, the stock appreciated by 4,500%. That's not a typo. It went up 45 times in 2006 and ended the year as the biggest gainer by far on the TSX. I want to start by highlighting the power of uranium as an investment for people coming into the space. There's so few companies to invest in, so few of quality that when interest comes into the space, as we've seen in the past, there's explosive moves. George, what is going to make another uranium boom come like we had back from 2002 to 2007?
Well, I think the same, forces are in play today. Basically, the worldwide supply will not meet the worldwide demand. You take a look at all the projections, and starting as early as maybe 2018, 2019, we're going to be short of uranium. And of course, when the supply cannot supply the needs, prices are going to go up. And it takes a long time to bring a uranium project online. So what we have is a situation where the shortage of uranium will not be satisfied even with a drastic increase in the price because it takes so long to bring projects online. We've seen over the last couple of years projects being curtailed or actually shut down because of the low price of uranium we have today. So that's going to compound the problem and theoretically skyrocket that price in that time frame.
Well, George, let's step back a little bit to before 2006 and talk about how you found yourself in a small niche space like uranium. You quickly rose to the top and had one of the most successful companies at the time. How did you find yourself in the uranium space?
Well, I started back in the uranium business back in the late 70s with a startup company, a privately owned company that became the largest producer in the United States, twice as big as anybody else. And that company was very, very successful, but we sold the company because of the death of the majority owner. And I got out of the uranium business in the early 90s. Of course, the price of uranium was, pretty low in those days. So I got into some other business ventures and stayed in those things until the uranium price started up in the 2003, 2004 time period. I started looking at the industry again. And in 2005, decided it was time to try it again. So I set up a company called Energy Fuels and listed it on the Toronto Stock Exchange. And that's when you talked about the drastic increase in the share price of Energy Fuels in 2006. We listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange with a reverse merger with a Shell Corporation, and basically took that corporation, and put in the key uranium assets that I had acquired. And obviously, that's the company called Energy Fuels today, which is a very, very successful uranium company in the U.S., although I'm not in management. I'm still a shareholder of that company. That's kind of my real quick background. And, of course, I got out of the management of Energy Fuels in 2010 to take care of some of my other business interests. And then got back into the uranium just about 2 years ago with the acquisition of some assets from Energy Fuels. So that's how Western Uranium really got its start, by acquiring some of the original assets I had acquired for Energy Fuels. And, of course, we did another reverse merger to go public, and this time on the Canadian Stock Exchange. And that's where we kind of stand today.
Well, we're going to get into Western Uranium a little bit more as we get deeper into the interview here. In terms of uranium, one of the reasons that I find it to be such an exciting investment is it's one of the few commodities where when the price of the actual commodity skyrockets, it doesn't necessarily affect the use of the commodity, and that's because nuclear reactors, as a percentage of other costs, their fuel costs are only about 1 or 2%. And so when the price of uranium goes up substantially, it does not cut back on the amount of people or utilities that want to use nuclear power. George, can you talk a little bit more about all of the reactors going online and the upcoming demand that we're going to see in the next few years that's going to drive the uranium price up?
Yeah, sure. Of course, in the world today, we're producing a great deal of electricity with nuclear energy. In the U.S., of course, we're the biggest producer of nuclear electricity, not as a percentage, but in production. We've got about 100 reactors in operation and then about 3 or 4 under construction. And that's going to continue. There's no reason to shut these reactors down. There have been a few reactors of the older design shut down because they're somewhat inefficient and couldn't meet the new safety standards. But the new reactors being built, will produce some of the cheapest power that we have in the U.S. And of course, this is the case around the world. China, India, Russia are all building nuclear power plants at a breakneck pace because the fact is, I think, as you said, the fuel cost of reactors is almost insignificant in the cost of production of electricity. And so of course, they're carbon free. It's one of those sources that produces electricity 24 hours a day without any carbon output. So that's another real plus. If you're looking at global warming, you've got to go to some sources that produce electricity around the clock. And nuclear is the only one that does it carbon-free, other than, of course, hydro. But hydro is, again, limited by your hydro resources. So those countries that don't have that resource are looking at nuclear power. So that's one of the things that's going to drive the boom of uranium. To fuel all the reactors, you've got to have the uranium supply.
Well, George, you just highlighted the demand for uranium in the USA. What you didn't touch on is the source of uranium, which many of our listeners might know, primarily is sourced from outside the United States and imported in. That was done through a deal with Russia, which has expired a couple years ago, where they were disassembling warheads and using the fuel for power in the U.S. Now a lot of the fuel is coming from other countries. Only a few million pounds are actually produced in the U.S., and that might be part of the reason why the new company that you've started just about 18 months ago. It's called Western Uranium. It's listed on the Canadian Exchange under WUC. You actually just got your listing earlier this week on the OTCQX, which is significant in that U.S. investors can now easily buy shares of the company. So congratulations on getting that listing. But just in 12 to 18 months, you've already assembled some great assets. You have over 100 million pounds of uranium in the United States, and you have control of a proprietary mining technology, which we can talk about, that's going to totally revolutionize the uranium mining business. On top of all that, you have access to a fully permitted mill and a tolling agreement with an already existing mill. George, why don't you start out by just giving us the overview of Western Uranium that you would give to an investor hearing it for the very first time?
Okay, I'd be happy to do that. And of course, we started the company only about 18 months ago by acquiring some of the key assets in Colorado and Utah from Energy Fuels. Along with this were 7 mines that were already permitted for operation. And that's a key. Having mines you can put into production fairly quickly will allow us to be one of the next producers in the U.S. or, of course, in the world. And the assets you mentioned, with the acquisition, the merger with another company called Black Range Resources or Black Range Minerals, that created a very large asset base in the United States. All of our assets are in the United States, and that's one of the keys. The U.S. now produces less than 10% of its consumption when you're talking about nuclear energy fuel. So we think the U.S. will be a key in providing additional fuel for especially the U.S. Utilities that generate by nuclear power. So with our asset base, including, as you mentioned, the only fully licensed uranium mill that has yet to be built in the United States, and a toll milling agreement with the only existing mill that's operational in the United States, we're in a position to be in production fairly quickly. So that's kind of the basis. And then along with the acquisition of Black Range, we acquired the rights to this new technology they called ablation mining technology, which should, in our estimation, reduce the cost of production of uranium from the type of deposits that we have. This technology has been tested on a commercial scale, but it has not been employed at a mine site yet. So that's our next goal, is to put this technology actually at a permitted mine and start the production.
Well, worldwide cost of production, as defined by most mines, which are hard rock mining techniques, are $50 to $60 per pound, and therefore you have a lot of companies out there that are in a sitting and waiting game. You have pure optionality plays. Most of the uranium companies that exist today have spent tens of millions of dollars building up deposits that have no viability to go into production at current prices. And while we do believe that uranium prices will go to $60 and beyond, possibly in the next few years, you've decided to go ahead and put together a company that could be viable at $30, $35, $40 per pound and quite profitable through this ablation technology. I'd rather let you explain the ablation than me doing so, but essentially it's a technology that works within the mine. It turns the sandstone into a slurry. It then, under high pressure, shoots the slurry at itself, which upgrades the uranium / vanadium ore by 7 to 8 times. And so by the time that you get your ore out of the mine gate, you already are upgraded by a factor of 8 times, which of course cuts down significantly on the cost. Do you mind adding to that a bit?
Well, I think that's a good description of the process. It's a patented process that was developed by some scientists in Casper, Wyoming. And it even though it sounds simple, it's not as simple as it sounds. There's been, attempts to upgrade uranium ore over the past 50 years to find ways to cut the cost. The biggest problem with a lot of these, it couldn't be put into a commercial production scenario, where the ablation technology has been put into a commercial, continuous flow process. So it will take basically the rock out of the mine and allow you to remove a good part of that rock and just leave it at the mine site without using any chemicals. Of course, in the milling process, to remove the uranium from the rock, you use chemicals. You dissolve the uranium in sulfuric acid and then go through steps to precipitate it out and take it back out of the dissolved solutions. Well, the ablation process uses no chemicals. It's a physical process, as you described, where the slurry is driven against, particles are driven against each other, and it releases that uranium coating from the sand. And then the sand, which is almost then like a clean beach sand, is redeposited right into the mine. It doesn't change your mining cost. You still have to mine it, but what it changes is your transportation cost and your milling cost. And if you take a look at the equations, and this is just common, industry knowledge, of all those three, mining, milling, and hauling, the milling cost is the most expensive process. So if we can reduce the quantity of product that we have to put through the mill, we obviously reduce the cost. Environmentally, it's also a real plus, because the biggest problem with uranium mills is the disposal of the tailings, the waste from the milling process. Well, we're cutting down, as you said, we upgrade this, or we increase or we reduce the volume of material up to 80% of what we put through the mill. So that means 80% less of this tailings material we have to dispose of. And that's a real economic advantage, because we're producing less tailings, of course, less disposal areas, and less exposure to the environment. So it's a real plus from that standpoint. And we think the technology obviously could be used around the world. It'll be first used in the U.S. because we have the commercial machine ready to go. We have permitted mines. But we have some interest from other countries about using this, and whether it's licensed to the other producers, that's something yet we haven't decided. But again, it works on all types of sandstone hosted uranium deposits.
Well, George, Western Uranium, as you pointed out, has 7 permitted mines, which literally equates to tens of millions of dollars of past underground work, exploration already done, and then, of course, the proprietary technology of ablation. You guys just got your OTCQX listing, also oversubscribed a recent placement to cover basic G&A costs and costs for moving forward. But what's next? What does it cost to get into production? And with uranium hovering around $29, $30 per pound, is it time to go into production right now, or would you prefer to wait for slightly higher uranium prices?
Well, higher prices certainly wouldn't hurt. We're looking at kind of the term price right now, which is a bit more than the $29, $28. But with the term price today, our mines, we believe, would be economical. So we're looking at the next stage is building, we have one commercial ablation machine, but for a mine like the Sunday Mine Complex, which is a complex of 5 permitted mines, we need to have maybe 3 or 4 of these machines to handle the output. So our next step, obviously, will be to build additional ablation machines to put at the mine site. It's much more efficient to run that mine at full capacity. We could put 1 or 2 machines there, but when you staff up a mine like that, if you can get up to full production, your economics just look better. So what we'll be doing over the next few months is working on the construction of additional ablation machines to move to the Sunday Mine Complex, probably sometime mid-2017. It looks like that would be the time frame we would start. Uranium prices may or may not go up by then, but we'll be in a position. Of course, we've announced we do have one contract with a U.S. utility, so we need to start producing to deliver into that contract.
Well, based on the valuation of Western Uranium, the leadership team, the assets controlled, I am of the opinion that Western Uranium is extremely undervalued. I am a substantial shareholder of Western Uranium as a disclosure. But Western Uranium is currently being valued as if it's an optionality play, meaning investors are currently just valuing it based on the amount of pounds in the ground, and even at that point, it's deeply undervalued. But when put in the context of a potential near-term producer and a low-cost producer, there's tremendous upside available to investors that are willing to buy now. Of course, as George pointed out, a rise in the price of uranium does always help, but a company that has a new technology and can produce at a substantially lower cost than its peers is always going to be an attractive place to put money. George, I want to ask you as we start to close up the interview here, for interested investors, of course, they can go ahead and go to your website. They can also look up the stock, which is listed on the CSE, and the OTCQX. Is there any way for people to get in touch with you or other people on the management team to hear more about the company?
Sure, absolutely. My phone number is listed on our website. I'm happy to talk to investors or potential investors at any time. Of course, I've got an email address. So there's several ways to contact me, but feel free, or the investors should feel free to contact me. I'm always happy to talk about the company and give what information I can to investors and potential investors.
All right. Well, George, thank you so much for coming on the program. Truly a legend in the uranium business. And hopefully, as we have another boom coming up here, investors positioned properly are going to make a fortune as they did back in 2002 to 2007, particularly with companies like Energy Fuels.
Thank you, Colin.
Think you understand the junior mining sector, and you think that the participants in the mining sector, junior mining sector, are good people and kind people, hit the bid.
And the world is always going to need raw materials. It's going to need copper and gold and nickel and so forth.
Totally destabilized. Hey, Troll, did you hear what's going on in Yemen? Or are you too stupid?